Welcome to a fantastic game played by Magnus Carlsen against one of his greatest rivals, Levon Aronian. This game was played at the Tata Steel tournament of 2012, which was a very strong tournament. Lots of strong players. So Carlsen opens up with c4, which is the English opening. Aronian responds e6, preparing for a d5 at some point. Knight comes out to c3, very natural square, and d5 is played. So d5 allows Carlsen to enter a Queen's Gambit position. After d4, Aronian enters a Petrosian variation of the Queen's Gambit, which may appear somewhat passive, but it does prevent the dark squared bishop from coming to g5. So here, instead of playing the main line of knight f3, he plays the second most popular move, which is c takes d5. And Carlsen has played this position plenty before. And so after the exchange, we have what is called a Carlsbad structure, where white has the open c file, the semi-open c file, black has the semi-open e file, and we often see a minority attack on the queen side, which kind of disrupts black's pawn structure, possibly creating an isolated d pawn in some attacks. So white plays bishop to f4, and this move tickles the f pawn, and Aronian just plays f6, defending the center. Queen comes to c2, a very natural square for the queen, very useful, very versatile, and very safe. The knight gets developed, and now we see the first novelty of the game. We see h3. h3, what it does is it takes g4 away, taking it away from the bishop or the knight, and it really reminds Aronian as to how bad his light squared bishop is, because this guy has no future on any of these squares, as you can see. So Aronian takes care of this immediately by playing g6. g6 prepares a nice developing move with tempo. Some might argue that it weakens the king side, however, but e3 is played. e3 allows for the bishop to come out. Carlsen needs to develop his king side. So after the bishop attacks the queen, the natural move would be to just block with the bishop, but Carlsen decides to make a slight concession and hope to keep his best minor piece. And he plays queen to d2. Now we see h5. Somewhat of a surprise, I'd say. But it does have some subtle defensive qualities. For instance, g5 is now unavailable to Carlsen. Not sure that Carlsen would be playing that, but this move does a good job discouraging the plan. Carlsen ends up playing bishop to d3 at this point, because now with this move here, the light squared bishop is a little bit better now that it can't be kicked as easily, so it's worth getting rid of. Carlsen takes it off the board. Knight comes out d7. Where else would it be? And knight g to e2. This is a sly little move because it allows for f3 to be played in combination with e4 to follow, ending up with a strong center. a5 is played to take away from Carlsen's possible minority attack, and both players just castle. f3 is finally played, and now Aronian shows that he's in it to win it. Plays b5. Pretty bold move, gaining some space on the queen side, but possibly weakening his c-pawn. And e4 is calmly played, as to be expected. D takes. Another possibility would have been to play b4 for Aronian, kicking the knight away, but this is also good. And now we see the center being strengthened. We have two strong central pawns, and a very useful semi-open F file for Carlsen. Alright, but Aronian does have one tactical idea, and that's to move the knight to c5. Here Carlsen brought his queen to f3, but a nice alternative would have been to move the queen to e3, which would have allowed for, well, of course the knight would have to move, since the pin is no longer available to black. This little bishop to h6 move, that would be a real problem for black to deal with. But Carlsen opted not to take that route and moves queen to f3. Knight e6, since the pin is still no longer valid, and now the bishop has to retreat somewhere, as opposed to being used on that h6 square. Still, Carlsen has a nice advantage, with a strong center and a clear plan. b4 is played by Aronian, and Carlsen's knight has to move. If knight goes to a4, it has little to no prospect, because b6 is taken, c5, c3, so we see knight go to b1. It's much easier to bring into the game. So we see the knight retreat, hoping maybe to put a piece on g5, and the knight is no longer blocking the bishop and queen on this diagonal. And the knight's improving his position. Rook defends a weak pawn, and Carlsen decides to support his d-file. Now bishop h4 comes. We see g3 now by Carlsen, which may look a little scary, but as you can see, he's got plenty of pieces around his king, and these pawns are not going to get dislodged. So the bishop retreats, and we see knight c4 with pressure on a5 and towards the center. And black then retreats his bishop to a fianchettoed position, kind of keeping the king's side safer and allowing for more fluidity and motion for his pieces, particularly his f-pawn. So we see b3, preventing play on the queen side. And now queen to e7. This move actually offers up the a-pawn, but if knight takes, now black has a cool tactic of knight here, attacking the queen. Let's say queen to g2 or something. We have knight takes e4, and black's winning with a better position. Well, winning by a little bit because of the bad knight. Strong central knight taking a nice pawn, sucking the life out of white. So Carlsen is correct in not taking the pawn, and he just plays queen g2, probably to prevent that tempo gaining move. The knight moves up now, and Carlsen this time is correct in his assumption that he may now take. After rook f to e8, Aronian's hoping to have compensation by having Carlsen's knight on the rim and a strong central force. e5 is played, keeping the pawn's integrity, and knight comes out. We see bishop to d2, simply maintaining the bishop and adding pressure to black's position. Rook e to d8, preparing to bear down upon Carlsen's weakest point. Knight out here, not minding knight takes and possibly getting the bishop out to a more aggressive square. And here Aronian makes a bit of a blunder. He plays queen to a7, and you can pause your videos and try to figure out why this was a blunder and find Carlsen's strongest move. But I'm going to continue now. The move is knight takes on c6. This is a very strong move, forking queen and rook, and so rook should take, and after that, knight takes the knight, because the pawn on c6 is no longer there defending the knight, and one attacker, one defender, so that's good. We see rook c2 now, and it's the most active way to play for black, attacking the pawn again on a2 and pinning the bishop. Here we see king h1, which is a nice little move to be making for Carlsen. What it does is it prevents the bishop from just winning a pawn here due to the pin the queen has against the king. So now bishop back up to f8 looks kind of silly, but it protects against knight takes on b4. So Carlsen now plays a great move. He plays e6, which is the strongest move according to engines. e6 is a natural move that threatens to be playing, e7 amongst other things. Queen a8 is played here, and e7 is indeed strong, but Carlsen plays a decent alternative. He plays e takes on f7. Real quick, the reason why e7 was so strong is because it's a fork, and there's kind of a cool variation that follows. Rook has to take to prevent just dropping a piece, and now we have one good move, which is e8 equals queen, or rook here actually would have been nice as well. Well, it would have been the same. And the reason this is kind of hard to see is because the inclination would be to just take the bishop, but then the king could recapture, and then this rook would not be hanging. But after the pawn becomes a queen, it distracts the queen from taking the rook. From defending the rook. So now 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Both players have 4 pieces, but white has the 2 rooks, and black only has 1. So we might see something like rook takes on a2, and then rook d to e1 attacking the queen. That's just winning for white. So Carlsen decided to play e takes f7 check, king h8, and this is actually a blunder, because a strong move would have been to play knight f4, which was played. Queen takes on g2, and now king takes. Knight takes would have been stronger according to the computer, but it's fine. Rook takes on d4, and here Carlsen plays the only good move. Rook to f2. If anything else is played, say for instance knight takes g6, for instance, check, there would be king g7, adding pressure to the knight. Knight could take the bishop, and here black would have rook takes bishop, rook takes rook, and rook takes rook with check. So after king moves, the knight takes, and black's up a piece. So that's what would happen if anything besides rook f2 was played. So now rook d6 is played, and now rook d6 was an important move to make because it maintained drawing chances for Aronian. Rook c, alright, let's go back a bit, sorry. If, say, rook played to c6, for instance, which was one of the alternatives, white would have rook e1, threatening to do mean things to the opponent after rook to e8, knight g5, attacking the pawn, rook g8. Now we need to see something like king to g7 to try to defend. h4 now allows knight to e6. Knight takes on f7 now, that's only move. And we have a nice knight fork, forking the king and the rook. So rook must take, and white wins in exchange. So that's an interesting little variation. So rook took the pawn, rook f2 now. So here we are. He found rook d6, which is the only way to maintain some kind of a drawing chance. And bishop to c1 now. A very strange but beautiful move. And it's the best move because it's threatening to eventually play bishop to b2. So rook takes on f2, king takes, rook takes, and now comes bishop to b2. So now if you look at the material, white's just down a whole rook, but he has calculated into the future. Knight f6 blocks, bishop takes, king out of the way, now knight attacks the bishop. And knight and bishop versus rook would be too easy for Carlsen in this position, considering that he has a pawn here, a very strong pawn, on the f-file. So the bishop moves. Now white sacrifices his bishop as well to try to promote. So bishop moves, and we still promote. So bishop takes, knight takes with check, king moves, and we have that position I was talking about earlier, knight and bishop versus rook. However, white's pawn is gone. Knight e6, g5, h4, g takes h4, g takes h4. I'm just playing through these moves pretty quickly because they're just simplifying moves. King g6 now, getting the king more active. And now we see the knight move to a square where he can possibly attack the pawn. Rook up to d3. Knight c6 now, attacking the pawn, defending the bishop as well. Rook d2 check. King keeping up the pressure on the rook. Rook runs and takes the a pawn. And instead of immediately taking, Carlsen just moves his bishop, adding pressure. No rush. Rook a1. King d4. Black's pretty much just trying to find a comfortable square for his rook. And now white moves his king over. So all of his forces are going to help the b-pawn promote. Now black's king rushes in to try to save the day. Knight takes, check, king moves towards the center. Now the rook is planning to possibly attack the bishop or something of the like. Possibly add a check as well. Knight moves out of the pawn's way. Here's the check, king moves, and now the pawn is won on h4. But the b-pawn is a little bit too fast now and starts to run. Rook h1, hoping to stop the pawn. Pawn just rushes on forward, attacks the pawn. We see the knight now defend it with check. King has to kind of run away. And here we just have a clear win for Carlsen. Aronian's pawn is never going to be able to promote because the the b pawn is faster, and if the rook sacrifices itself for this pawn, the bishop's going to prevent the king from, well, the bishop and the knight together will prevent the king from helping the pawn down. So thanks for watching, everybody.